Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back.
Good
And
morning,
today we
people.
our amazing guest, Hank. How are you, Hank?
Man, I'm blessed. I'm sitting here. I think it's supposed to get up to the high 60s today, even though I'm wearing a long sleeve sweater shirt. But it'll be okay. It's called adaptabilities. That's all.
Well, unfortunately, in Indiana, it might snow tomorrow, so we have to be careful.
Adaptability. You know.
So, Hank, what do you see on the screen right now? What's in front of our face?
It says that the U.S. economy flashes a recession warning sign.
Mm,
Um, and believe it, I don't. Seeing that, I don't know whether that's real or whether it's just one of the tactics that will cause people to be somewhat impulsive in their efforts to do things or compulsive. Since COVID, there are certain things that you go to the grocery store, you can't find. You go to a sporting goods store, you might not be able to find your size. And as we were talking yesterday or last week, the global economies are interconnected. And because we get lots of goods and services, we import lots of goods and services, there will be a lack of, a scarcity of certain commodities in certain areas of the US. So I think we all need to be mindful of how things are happening, how things are trending, and things of this sort, and not to get paranoid by flashing signs. Um, because Leland, I think to some degree we've been in a recession for the last 3 years.
I would agree. I would agree that I believe that the signs of the recession took place during the Trump administration.
Hmm. Hmm. To think, if I could piggyback on that, to think, where would we be if central government hadn't stepped up and put money into the economy? People did not have jobs. People, because they didn't have jobs, they couldn't afford to pay rent or mortgage or lease. Okay. They couldn't make car payments. So if the federal government, in my opinion, if the federal government hadn't stepped up, right, wrong, or indifferent, we would have been not in a recession. The next step down is called a D who?
A depression.
A depression. So, there are people who are high and mighty who get out there and they use words, in my opinion, they use words somewhat casually. I don't know whether it's for a reaction or to cause some other type of emotion for people. Okay. But depending on where you live in a particular city, there's a scarcity.
Hmm.
And that scarcity is exacerbated by a lack of transportation or motive or because people don't own vehicles. So when they go to the store, they're on the bus line because they can't afford a taxi, and they're taking, you've seen them, and they're taking their groceries home in a little grocery sack. And they get to the store, and the products that they're getting are could be weeks old rather than hours old. But that's the best that they can do. So I'm not fearful of warning signs of recession, because if these signs are true, is it because the economy or is it because of the conflict?
Right. And I believe what the media does well is the media does a very good job of painting scapegoats. And
Hmm.
so for the declining economy and already declining job growth, in my opinion, if
Hmm.
you can blame a war or conflict, you can say, hey, that's the reason. But we have to remember that the way that economics is tracked is that economics are have indicators or data that is tracked at a minimum of 90 days in the past. So whatever you're
Hmm.
seeing right now, it's a result of something that took place 90 days or 180 days prior.
And it's interesting, Leland, that you say that because I was just again having these flashes. Um, there are times that the media ask gotcha questions to leaders. Leaders. I use that term loosely because some of the people are not really leaders, and they are trying to get the the person who's being asked the question to make some type of gaffe or make a statement, an innocent statement that is now taken as gospel. And then the airwaves are now running with the fact that Hank Hunt, you know, representatives, congressman, governor, somebody said XYZ. And then we are trying to find any reason to tear somebody else down rather than how do we, I think as a people, how do we be a little, again, yesterday we talked about humanity, right?
Yeah.
How do we become a little bit more humane? How do we stop projecting this idea of heads I win and tails you lose? You know, how do we stop implying that where you live is a cesspool? I mean, I don't know how we do that. It's as if there has to be winners and losers, and that bothers me. You know, as Rodney King says, can we all just get along?
After being beaten, huh? So
Within
we
inches of his life.
within inches of his life.
Hmm.
Hank, you mentioned shortage, right? And so
Hmm.
we're going to transition to our next topic, which
Hmm.
is somewhat a shortage. Okay.
Yes, indeedy.
So would you say that this is
Sing,
a reality
yeah,
that single family rent prices are?
yeah. It says single family rent prices are surging at a record rate, led by homes in Sunbelt cities like Miami and Phoenix. Um, People, I think you will realize that there are ebbs and flows constantly, ebbs and flows. People are going to go, those who can't afford to go, they're going to go where the jobs are. Okay? They're going to try as best they can to get their families out of situations or circumstances that they don't feel are wholesome. Now, there's an exodus of people out of California or out of New York. People want to move to warmer climates to a large degree. Phoenix is a nice area. Miami is a nice area, but there is a shortage of homes in those areas. There's a living accommodations in those areas. So it goes back to the economics we talked about. Fewer homes, greater demand, higher the prices. Okay? But the interesting thing about it, Leland, is that for the new people that are going to those cities, they have means, 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 meaning that they can afford to buy almost anything they want to buy. And if they wanted to live on the outskirts in the burbs of Phoenix or Miami, they can afford to do what, Leland?
They can afford to do that.
That's it. They can afford to. They don't have to be in the center of town, where things are sky high. So they've got different types of options. And most of the people who live in the inner city are relying on something called public PT. You know what PT means?
Time, huh?
No, it's public transportation. That's the
So
ebb and flow. Hmm.
I want to add something to that. So New York recently last year, mentioned a tax plan that they have, and that caused many hedge funds to move south.
Mhm,
So, of
mhm.
course, as Hank mentioned, people are going to follow the jobs. They're going to go and move there. But as a consequence, as people are relocating to those areas, costs will go up. And as the costs go up, the affordability will go down. And it starts a whole new cycle all over again.
And will create the more people that move into an established neighborhood, it's going to now put an extra demand on goods and services that are available to people, which then creates that scarcity that we talk about,
Absolutely.
or inflationary tendencies in that neighborhood that we talk about. So people don't take things in isolation. Sit back and say, how might XYZ happen if ABC happens? Okay, you can't control it. Okay, but don't be alarmed by it. Just say, hey, this is part of life, and then act accordingly, according to the needs of your needs and the needs of your family. If there's a shortage of toilet paper, there's no need in going out and getting 5 cases of toilet paper. Come on, people, let's be real. You
So,
go to the grocery store and you like bananas. There's no need in getting 10 bunches of bananas. You know, couple bushes of apples. Come on, people.
so Hank, we mentioned a few things in reference to cycles, and that brings us to our next topic, which is a cycle that appears to never end.
Um, and Leland, when it comes to COVID, it says cases are rising as Omicron's stealth subvariant spreads around the world. The smart folk, the scientists, the doctors are saying that we will be living with COVID for a long time. Okay. Now, a lot of cities and towns and states are have reduced mask mandates in things of that sort, and saying, hey, don't have to do this and don't have to do that. Um, After 2 years, I'm comfortable wearing a mask. So on the gear shift of my car is a mask. I've got the surgical type and I've got the KN95. But when I turn my car off and I reach for when I get ready to shift into park, my hand automatically touches what, Leland?
The mask.
And what do I, and it reminds me I need to do what? Put it on. Only thing I'm saying is, going back to this humanity again, it's your right not to. It's your humanity too. So, from my perspective, are you going to let your rights or your humanity determine how you live?
Mm.
Pfizer indicated that we may need another booster. You don't find as much in many of the other pharmaceutical companies saying anything, because seemingly Pfizer seems to have its thumb on the control of COVID. They were able to come up with a brand new vaccine in less than a year, where it used to take years. So COVID, as catastrophic as it has been, has caused our smart folk to think outside the box, Leland. But I think part of it has been what the medical society or the scientific society has been doing since it may have been the H1N1 or the avian flu. They've been looking at how viruses such as the coronavirus and its variants might be contained, controlled, not necessarily eliminated, and how to keep the devastating effects of these viruses from creating this the the catastrophes of yesteryear. So I just tell people to just be smart now, or be wise. I'm sorry, be wise. There's a difference to me in being wise and being smart, because normally there's another word that goes after smart and starts with an A.
That's right.
And and again, we're using COVID as a weapon to divide us.
Yeah.
Okay. And Leland, you and I had this conversation. I'm a man of color, obviously,
I did not know, Hank. You know, so
and
I
I
don't
under
I don't
and
see color, Hank. I don't
I
see color.
yeah, right. I understand. I understand. I'm aware of this the Tuskegee situation that made a lot of people of color paranoid. But I look at COVID and the vaccinations that have come along, and I look at it this way: if the smart folk had created a vaccine and they didn't share it with the populace, that's when I'd be pissed. I'm included in the crowd now. I'm happy. But if they had created something and I'd have been excluded from it, I would have been pissed. So I don't think we should stop being afraid of, embrace the idea, figure out, and here's the thing. We need to be informed. We need to be more educated about what is involved with the processes. Wherever it is that you're getting your news from, if it's not a broad enough perspective, then you need to change things. And I've told people on more than one occasion. I do ABC, CBS, CNBC, PBS, British News, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and any place. In fact, there's a Indian station that basically slants its conversations towards China. Now you say, Hank, you're paranoid. No, I'm trying to be as informed as I possibly can be, so that if I say something, it's not just a puff of smoke.
Mm.
I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert, but I think I'm well enough informed that if I say something can be verified or validated by something other than a stovepipe.
Mm. It's very interesting.
Well, we were talking about an EV company, the guy earlier,
Right.
and he's talking about inflation. No, now hang on. He didn't say recession. He says inflation, and he's increasing the price of his vehicles. Now, what is it that he knows about the economy that the everyday person doesn't know?
Quite a bit, and part of that is because um, many of his biggest suppliers or contracts are with the governments themselves. So he would
Okay,
have a better pulse on that.
okay.
Um,
So, mhm,
One thing I want to add too, in these key points, reference to the Omicron quote unquote stealth, is mentioning that COVID cases are rising throughout Europe. And what's pretty interesting is normally we hear about COVID rising throughout the United States. So I'm expecting that this will play some kind of role in the future with the United States at a
and
greater
China.
scale.
It's around the world. Even China. I was reading something yesterday where China is shutting down some of the access that people have in China. You know, and I'm not saying that China is bad. There were those who said, well, hey, they caused it. Let's get over it. Let's stop pointing fingers. Let's figure out how can we get again? How can we get along? How do we support those who are trying to save our lives?
Awesome. Hank, speaking of around the world, speaking
Mhm.
of European countries suffering with COVID, there's another European country that may also be suffering financially right now.
Yes, and it talks about Russia. And it's unfortunate that the powerful sometimes have a tendency to exert that might on those that are not as powerful. But I applaud the world leaders who've come together to say this act of aggression um, is not part of civil society, and you will pay dearly for your actions. But Leland, the problem for me is that innocent people in Russia will be suffering severely because the central government is doing some things that are not part of good order for the rest of the world. And it's sad. And quite frankly, for the last week, I have not watched the news um, because there's this constant drumbeat of of cruelty and devastation and starvation and just war. War is hell. There's nothing civil about war. And it's unfortunate that innocent people have to suffer, innocent people have to die. And if you've got somebody who's unwilling to compromise, unwilling to yield at the request of lots and lots of other people and or countries or governments, then you say, well, hey, we should do something. I want you to understand that if you back a dog into a corner, in all likelihood he will bite, and you don't want Putin to be pushing buttons that could annihilate countries, cities, millions and millions of people around the world. You really don't want that. So I'm hoping that there's calm. I'm hoping that we can reach some agreement. I hate to see innocent people, die as a result of this. But if those who are sitting back and saying it can't get any worse, I would ask you to open your eyes.
So there's a few things that I want to kind of bring full circle. Yesterday in our live discussion, we touched
Mm-hmm.
on bonds, bonds,
Mm-hmm.
and what we're seeing right now is that Russia possibly may default on their debt, their government debt that they have. Now, what's
Mm-hmm.
interesting with this government debt is that much of this debt, it says, well, let me back up. 117 million is an interest to two sovereign euro bonds. That payment is due on Wednesday, and it is one of four payments that are due in the month of March alone. So
Wow.
what I find interesting is that unless Russia has, I don't know, various bitcoins or in various gold that they're going to pay, it's going to be difficult for them to pay $117 million of interest payments. Um, well, it's probably more than that. It's probably a total of, let's see, 100 times four is going to be 400 or so. So 400
Mm-hmm.
million interest for the month of March when your currency has been reduced to almost zero. It's going to be pretty hard to do that unless you're going to have some kind of other physical hard reserves or alternatives.
But Leland, as this conflict invasion was happening, I think I saw a figure that says Russia may have had a $500 billion in reserves. It was either 400 billion or 500 billion in reserves. Okay, that they had been stockpiling money, so they may be able to reach their debt service for a period of time. But all of the spigots for the global economy have been turned off. Their banks are closed. Their stock market are closed. got oligarchs saying, "Hey, I'll pay you $100 million to get rid of this guy." I mean, supposedly. So I'm just saying that eventually there'll be some internal strife, and where the people hopefully will rise up against the government and says enough is enough. But you're right, Leland. It that's what happens when you go against norms.
Well, um, you know, I hope that the stockpile is not in liquid cash, because their cash has been devalued greatly. And so I would assume that their stockpile is going to be in some kind of alternative, maybe gold. And so, speaking of alternatives such as gold, us to our last topic for our live discussion today. And so, Hank, I thought this was very odd, especially since in an earlier discussion we had, I believe this week, we
Hmm.
had mentioned last week we had mentioned AMC, right?
Yes, we
So
had. Mhm. Go ahead, sir. Sorry.
yeah, so it basically just came full circle. I mean, what's your thoughts on this?
And again, for those who can't see, it just says that movie theater chain AMC just bought a stake in a Nevada gold miner. Okay, sending the penny stock soaring. So what's happening is that, in my opinion, everyone is looking to diversify. COVID caused a lot of social entities to be depressed in a great degree because people couldn't go. And I think the theaters are just starting to open, with a certain degree of normalcy. So again, companies are constantly trying to figure out how do we maintain relevance when there are circumstances that are above our control to operate. Um, and again, gold is one of those commodities that if you've got enough of it, um, good on you. The only thing I say is that if you are fortunate enough to have a few 100 pounds of gold, you got a problem in where you're going to store it because the bank's not going to store your all of your gold. But again, that's deviating from the issue. These guys are just trying to figure out how do they continue to make money? How do they maintain a certain degree of stability in the entertainment industry? And I think, Leland, most of us who are trying to figure out how to get more with less, okay, would take a shot at a gold mine if we felt that it was going to be beneficial to us financially.
One of the things that I find interesting is that AMC is geared or labeled under a communications company, and for a communications company to purchase stake in a gold miner is pretty odd. So I would assume that they're anticipating something in the economy that most aren't, and I would think that that's something to take notice.
Hmm. Hmm. And you make a valid point. AMC people recognize the name, and we talked about Amazon with the stock split. People recognize the name, and and again, we were talking about Musk. People recognize the name. Buffett, we talked about a couple weeks ago. People recognize the name of these very, very powerful people. And when these people speak, yesteryear there was a financial company called E.F. Hutton, Hutton, and the commercial was when E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. Well, we've got a lot of Huttons out there today, and I would just say don't be too impulsive. Again, do the research. You know, if you think that investing in penny gold stock is going to get you someplace, that's all well and good. But if you invest in it, make certain that you can afford to lose whatever you invest initially, anyway. So
Yeah.
I like being able to deviate, to expand, um, to hedge bets. I think is admirable, Leland.
You know what, Hank? I think also just from a play, like a chess game, I'm looking at this as maybe as things continue,
Hmm.
and knowing that if Russia does have reserves, they have reserves based on um, things that are not cash, okay,
Hmm.
like other resources, maybe gold, and that would be a benefit for other companies to have excess gold because that's probably going to be the thing that's traded along with Bitcoin to keep that country afloat.
Hmm.
So this
Okay.
might be a hedge that later on other smaller miners will be bought up in bulk for competition as a way to corner the market and control prices for gold. Now, the only thing I want to add for regular citizens of the United States is again based on history. If we are stockpiling gold as individuals, what could happen is that if our government needs the gold to offset anything, I don't know, maybe like inflation, then our government will confiscate those resources
Hmm.
very, very quickly, and you'll be
Hmm.
given a little stipend to say thank you. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And every
Hmm.
country is different, so I'll leave that there.
And that's Leland. That's deep. And again, it just speaks of the confluences that weigh on every decision that central government has to make. And that's why I get frustrated with some of the people we send to Washington D.C. who become myopic, um, and they just want to maintain power. They want to get there, and their common decency goes out the window, and that is just so frustrating. I
Well,
apologize for my diatribe, but it's crazy.
with that being said, I want to thank you all for joining us. If you all have any other questions, please put them in the comments. Also, we want to remind you all that March 23rd at 7 p.m. via Zoom, we're having a live multifamily investing training. Again, that's March 23rd, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll be covering multifamily investing live, so you can ask any questions that you have, and we look forward to serving you guys soon. So thank you all for
Hey,
listening.